Though a critical success, the original Mega Man did not shift the expected units, so the game's producer was against the creation of a sequel. The team, however, thought differently, and Kitamura went straight to Capcom to get the green light to develop Mega Man 2. The team got the green light, but under the condition that they make it while still working on other projects. They also invited the artist from the original project, Keiji Inafune, to take a more hands-on role with the development with this 3-month project. Inafune agreed, and joined the team, which had a monumental task ahead of them. Not only did they have to top the well-reviewed, though underperforming, original game in terms of both quality and sales, they also had to prove the franchise's viability into the future if they hoped to be able to continue making Mega Man games. Ultimately, what they came out with was a bigger and much more polished game than the original. One of the most common complaints about Mega Man 1 was its difficulty. Due to this, the team decided to add items known as Items 1, 2, and 3 to aid players who struggled with the harsher challenges in the original game get past similar puzzles in the sequel. They didn't just hand them to the players from the outset, instead they made them into rewards for beating specific bosses, which allowed skill to remain an integral part of the design. For Mega Man 2, Kitamura wanted input from the fans, so they had a contest for people to send in ideas and designs of enemies and even bosses. There were 8,370 total fan submissions, and Inafune said that tweaking them made him feel more like a producer than a designer, and taught him what he needed to think about when it came to making games. All 8 Robot Masters were created based on fan submissions, and Inafune even went on to draw several other submissions, which would, at least in part, find their way into later Mega Man titles. Ultimately, when designing the gameplay of the bosses, the team started with the weapon design. This opened the door to many more uses for the weapons throughout the stages, as well as a number of secret effects when certain weapons are used on certain bosses. A few such secrets are that several bosses will be healed by their own weapons, such as Heat Man and Bubble Man, but Metal Man will be killed by his own weapon in only 2 hits. Along with the different weapon effects, other secrets were added into the game, such as the ability to change the stars on the boss screen into birds in an effort to get the game featured in gaming magazines, which was the best way to gain publicity at the time. When the game released in North America, it did so with a difficulty selection. The original game's difficulty in Japan was relabeled as difficult, while an easier mode in which Mega Man deals double damage was added to the game labeled normal. And speaking of the North American release, yes, Mega Man 2 also has some pretty terrible box art. Not nearly as bad as the original game, but it also got a ton of flack, especially for the fact that, once again, Mega Man was depicted holding a pistol instead of using an arm cannon. Mark Erickson, who painted the box art, defended the decision by saying in an interview, "So I said a pistol, do you want me to do a pistol?" And he said, "Yeah, let's put a pistol in there." So I did what I was told and I put a pistol in there. Add that to the fact that they only had like a day and a half for me to do the painting, and what you wound up with was not the greatest result. But certainly a result that was not my fault. I mean, they told me to put a pistol in his hand. Ultimately, Mega Man 2 became a huge success, selling over 1.5 million copies, and it still stands as the best-selling entry in the franchise to this day. Not only did Kitamura's team completely outshine the original game, but in 3 months of development, they put the entire Mega Man franchise on the map. But I guess I'm getting a little ahead of myself, aren't I? Let's take a look at the game itself, shall we? As I stated in the dev history portion of this video, this game has 2 difficulty modes. Difficult being the original version of the game, and normal being the easier difficulty where Mega Man deals more damage and takes less damage. Due to this, I've decided to base this entire review on the difficult setting. All normal mode does is doubles the power of Mega Man's Buster and halves the damage he takes, so I see no reason to go into it with any depth. So, without further ado, let's jump right in. A central aspect to Mega Man is the music, and though Mega Man 1 had some solid tunes, it's one of the few games in the series where I don't think the music warrants a spotlight. Mega Man 2's tunes, on the other hand, is a different story altogether. The music here is wonderful and squeezes every ounce of the NES's hardware to create some extremely catchy and memorable tunes.
that brings us into the story. Unlike the first game where the title screen is static and boring, the title screen of Mega Man 2 actually tells the player what is going on in the world of the Blue Bomber. After the events of the first game, Dr. Wily built 8 more robots and is once again threatening the world. It's up to Mega Man to destroy the 8 robots and stop Dr. Wily's evil plan. And that's about it. This time, the manual doesn't hold any additional story, and as far as I could find, there wasn't any advertising telling the story of the game either. But, given the short dev time and the fact that the universe was already established, I guess I can give them a pass this time. Once you choose your difficulty, you are shown Mega Man 2's first upgrade from the original game. There is now a password system to save your progress. Not only is this a fantastic addition to the game, making it so you don't have to play through the entire thing in one go, as with the original, but it is a godsend for review purposes. I cannot tell you how wonderful it was just to be able to generate a password with specific parameters I needed for a specific recording rather than having to play the game over and over and over again just to get specific recordings. The password records which bosses you've defeated and how many of the newly added energy tanks you are carrying. The only drawback is that they do not record any data about the Wily stages, so once you've entered Wily Castle, you'll have to take that entire section on in one go. But still, it's way better than the entire game. As mentioned when talking about the passwords, the game introduces the series' iconic E-Tanks. These tanks completely refill Mega Man's energy when used. Unfortunately, unlike the original game, Mega Man 2 does not allow the player to return to any completed stages, and getting a game over causes Mega Man to lose all his collected E-Tanks. This means there's a finite number of E-Tanks that can be found throughout the game, and any missed tank is gone for the entirety of the run. Their inclusion makes it easier for players to brute force their way through boss encounters, but their limited availability and the fact that they vanish upon getting a game over means that you have to think about when best to use the item. This also adds a bit more strategy to the use of Mega Man's special weapons, particularly in the Wily stages, when the only reliable way to fully restore your weapon energy is just to get a game over. I'm not saying that it's a good thing that they vanish when you get a game over. Actually, it's exceptionally annoying. But it is something you have to consider as you fight through the various levels. They do, however, add replay value. Many of the E-Tanks are hidden in areas that the player can't reach without certain items or weapons, meaning that as you better learn the game on subsequent playthroughs, you can plan out your path through the game to be able to always have E-Tanks on hand whenever you need them. In fact, this is the game's most shining feature. Every stage has some sort of alternate path or challenge that makes breaking away from the standard boss weakness order worthwhile, whether it's walls that can be destroyed with the crash bombs blocking your path, or challenges that are more easily passed with items 1, 2, and 3. As with the first game, as soon as you press start, or enter a password, you're dropped into the level select. Just this time, instead of 6 stages, there are 8 for Mega Man to take on while going after Wily. Also, just like the first game, each stage is built to be a potential starting point for the game. In fact, I would argue that Mega Man 2 is far more beginner-friendly than the first game was. The stages are loaded with more challenge and obstacles, yes, but they are tooled much better for the player to learn how to conquer them. No matter which stage you pick, the polish present in the game is clear, and it makes Mega Man 1 look like a student project by comparison. Take Metal Man stage as an example, which is often considered a good starting point because of how ungodly powerful Metal Blade is as a weapon. You start off on a conveyor belt leading directly into a pit, and when you jump over it, you land on a conveyor belt running in the opposite direction, leading you into the same pit. The game is teaching you, in a relatively safe way, how these conveyors work, and it even rewards you with an E-Tank once you have conquered this simple challenge. After that, a new facet is added to the challenge when you see your first press. But look, the conveyor you're standing on is pulling you away from the press, giving you time to play around with it and figure out how to time your movements to get past it. The next press increases the difficulty yet again by having a short conveyor that throws you directly into it. But at this point, you know you can run against the direction of the press in order to avoid taking damage here. That's not to say Mega Man 1 didn't teach the players as they played through, there just wasn't as much to teach. Most of the original game's obstacles were enemies that could be shot and destroyed. Mega Man 2, on the other hand, is loaded with environmental hazards, all laid out in such a way that the player learns of each one individually before they're all thrown together for a real challenge. The inclusion of these new elements, such as conveyor belts, presses, falling platforms, crash walls, etc., all build on each other to make truly satisfying challenges that the first game could only dream of. On top of that, each ability Mega Man obtains throughout the game makes various obstacles and enemies much easier to get past. Metal Blade barely uses any ammo and can fire in 8 directions, making it a truly fantastic weapon for tearing through enemies coming from any direction. Leaf Shield protects Mega Man from small enemies, making it perfect for getting through areas full of moles, or protecting yourself while on moving platforms. Time Stopper stops time, allowing you to pass through whatever hazards you may be having trouble with, though you can't deactivate it before it runs out of energy. Atomic Fire can be charged up to deal massive damage to most enemies. Air Shooter fires upward at an angle, making it useful against jumping enemies, and in particular makes short work of sniper armors. Bubble Lead can be used to reveal hidden pitfalls. Quick Boomerang can be fired constantly while the player holds down the fire button. Item 1 creates a platform that slowly rises, lasting for about 5 seconds. Item 2 creates a jet board that Mega Man can use to cross gaps, which lasts either until it runs out of energy or into something. And finally, Item 3 crawls up and down walls. Speaking of bosses, they are infinitely superior to what came before. In Mega Man 1, most boss fights were simple wars of attrition that were nearly impossible to win unless you came in with their weakness, which utterly decimated them. Not so in Mega Man 2. With the specific exceptions of Woodman, who has the highest defense of any boss, and Quickman, who simply moves too quickly to be hit with the Buster, every boss can be viably taken down without their weakness. It still takes some skill to take down each boss with the Buster. There's no Cutman in this game to get torn apart by Mega Man's little pea shooter this time around, but each boss's pattern can be learned and accounted for in such a way as to encourage the player to try again and again until they take it down. On the flip side, though the special weapons do make each boss fight easier, they do not just tear through the bosses in only 2 to 3 hits. You will still have to put forth some degree of effort in order to defeat these bosses, even with their weaknesses. They aren't easier, they're just more well balanced. There is, of course, an exception to this, and that is Woodman. His weakness is Atomic Fire, which is the first weapon in the series to have a charge shot, and when fully charged, Atomic Fire takes out over half of Woodman's health. However, you'll find later in the game that this course of action may not always be the best. Something Mega Man 1 kinda did well was to have bosses be able to be damaged differently by different weapons. For example, Iceman's weakness was the Thunder Beam, dealing 10 damage per hit. However, Hyper Bomb could be used to deal 4 damage per hit, and the Rolling Cutter could deal 2. But since there's no point in going through Mega Man 1 in any other order than the boss order, that is somewhat useless in that game. However, it's a different story in Mega Man 2, since there are many different ways to go through the game. For example, while Woodman's weakness is Atomic Fire, dealing a whopping 14 damage when fully charged, a viable alternative is Metal Blade, which only deals 2 damage, but uses significantly less energy and can be spammed quickly to rack up the hits, dealing upwards of 8 damage between attacks from Woodman. This means if you want to take down Woodman with relative ease, you don't necessarily need his actual weakness, which allows you to plan your own path through the game. It all feeds into how much player choice is built into the game's progression. I cannot express how much choice there is in how you want to progress through this game. It's simply fantastic and tailors to so many playstyles. I genuinely see why so many people call this game the best in the series. It doesn't force you into annoying scenarios that halt your progress. Instead, it gives you every tool you need in order to tailor the game experience to how you play. But that's all fine and good for the regulated stages. What about the Wily stages? As with the first game, the Wily stages are built to test Mega Man at his full potential, and this is where the frustration one may remember from the first game comes back to haunt the player. Now, something I'd forgotten to mention in my last video was how the Magnet Beam was used in the Wily stage. You may remember that I complained a bit about the Magnet Beam being a seemingly optional item that you can easily miss in a Eggman stage. The main point I had intended, and completely slipped my mind until I was watching the video after uploading it, was that there was an area where you actually need the Magnet Beam in order to progress in Wily Stage 1. Therefore, if you miss the Magnet Beam and get to this part of the game, you have to return to the stage select and go find the Magnet Beam. And it's entirely possible that you won't remember going past it in a Eggman stage, which means you just kinda gotta randomly check each stage until you find it. Mega Man 2 has several similar areas that require the use of items 1, 2, and 3, but fortunately you acquire these items no matter what in the game. So, problem solved, right? Well, not exactly. And this is going to be a frustration that keeps coming up for a little while in the classic series. The special items require energy to use, and that energy can only be refilled either by finding weapon energy pickups or getting a game over. Furthermore, most checkpoints in a stage are before some point where you need to use one of the 3 items. So, if you run out of energy for these items, you'll either be forced to trek back and farm weapon energy pickups, which will only fill whatever weapon you have currently active at the time, or suicide out to game over, which will not only force you to start up the entire stage again, but will also cause you to lose all of your E-tanks. And there are only 4 E-tanks to pick up through the Wily stages themselves, each requiring the use of a special weapon or item to obtain. Beyond that, these final stages are actually extremely fun with much less bullshit than their predecessors. No footholders flying you directly into spikes here, folks, just solid platforming challenges meant to test everything the player has learned throughout the game. We'll just forget that happened. Of course, as with Mega Man 1, each stage has its own unique boss to fight. First up is Mecha Dragon, which chases the Blue Bomber around several platforms until finally stopping to battle it out with Mega Man on 3 tiny blocks in midair. This boss will spit fireballs at Mega Man in an attempt to knock the Blue Bomber off the blocks he's standing on. Again, and again, and again, and again. Yeah, this boss is frustrating. It's really easy to get knocked into the pit. So easy, in fact, that it is lucky for you not to die immediately when getting hit by one of the thing's fireballs. And of course, when you die, you spawn back into an area right before where you need item 1 to get from one ladder to another. Oh, better get to farming Sniper Joes. Next is a boss called Pico Pico Kun. There's really not a lot to say about this boss. It's just a room where parts of the walls fly together to create cube robots that attack Mega Man. According to Kitamura, the idea was to have the area the player could stand on be reduced as the fight progressed, but that was ultimately cut because the devs thought it would be too hard, so there really is very little to say about this boss. Just kill it with bubbles and move on. After this is the Guts tank, which operates on the same design philosophy as the Yellow Devil in that it uses the background as part of its sprite. In addition to being the first look into Wily's weird obsession with Gutsman, the Guts tank is one of the more unique bosses for Mega Man to take down. It starts off by spitting mets from its chest cavity until Mega Man jumps onto its treads, where it'll stop spitting out mets and try to shoot Mega Man off of his treads. His weak point is his head, and his weakness is the quick boomerang, so just blast away until you take down Wily's homage to what is apparently his favorite robot master. I wonder why he didn't rebuild Gutsman in the first Rockman World game. Oh well, questions for a later video. Last is the Boo Beam Trap, which really lives up to its name Trap because it's designed in such a way that you will likely be unable to defeat it until you have died multiple times. The reason is that the Boo Beam Trap is a room with 5 domes that can only be destroyed with crash bombs, as well as 5 crash walls protecting them. The thing is, Mega Man can only fire a total of 7 crash bombs. So how does one defeat this thing? You kinda gotta think outside the box and figure out the exact order to destroy them in, and use item 1 to try to reach certain areas without breaking the crash walls. What? Are you out of item 1 from earlier in the Wily stages? Well, too bad! This boss requires nearly a full complement of crash bombs, and if you run out, you're screwed. Have fun! Finally, we get to what is now a Mega Man staple, the boss rush. Once again, this shows just how powerful the Blue Bomber has become over the course of his journey. However, unlike the previous game, we did not defeat a handful of bosses before reaching the end. Nope, we gotta take out all 8 Robot Masters here and now, and as soon as they're all down, it's time to take on Wily. This is where I need to rewind a little bit and go back to talking about something that I mentioned earlier in the videos, which is how different weapons affect different enemies. Wily Machine 2's weakness for both forms is Crash Bomb, but Mega Man can only fire 7 Crash Bombs, which is only enough to take down one of Wily Machine 2's forms. Furthermore, Wily Machine 2 deals a ton of damage, and you're highly unlikely to have any E-tanks left at this point in the game due to the aforementioned disappearing when you game over issue. So, what do you do? Well, it turns out that Phase 1 of Wily Machine 2 is actually capable of being damaged by atomic fire, and since atomic fire can be charged, you can deal 14 damage per hit to Wily with it. This takes us right back to using Metal Blade on Woodman. Having an alternative special weapon option to destroy Woodman allows the player to save their atomic fire energy for use against Wily. Once Wily Machine 2 is destroyed, the game is over and Mega Man has won. Or has he? Wily escapes in his pod and the floor below Mega Man is destroyed, dropping him into the caves deep below Wily Castle. After a walk through the cave, Mega Man finds one last boss shutter. But what could it be? Inside the boss room, Wily leaps out of his pod and transforms into an alien? Okay, so Wily's an alien then. Sure. The only thing that affects the alien is Bubble Lead, which does 1 point of damage, and everything else heals it. This fight is genuinely tough. Alien Wily floats around, firing quick blasts that Mega Man has to dodge while trying to get in close enough to drop bubbles onto the extraterrestrial threat. Finally, with perseverance, Mega Man overcomes his foe, and it is revealed that the alien is just a hologram controlled by the real Dr. Wily. With the hologram defeated, Wily finally bows before Mega Man, begging for mercy once again. The credits roll as Mega Man walks home once again, contemplating his life and his battles. Or at least that's what I assume is going on based on the mournful music and stoic look on Mega Man's face. Or maybe he's just thinking about taking a nap. I don't know, I'm a Moblin, not a robot. Mega Man 2 is the game that established the franchise's staying power. It was a passion project for the team, which was developed in only 3 months while the entire team worked on other projects. Mega Man 2 showed what developers can do when they are dedicated to the project. The game is not perfect, but it stepped up to the plate and outshone its predecessor in almost every single way. Not only that, but it grabbed the fan base the franchise needed to continue on into the future. Without that passion, we would probably never have seen the rest of the Mega Man series, or any of its sequels and spin-offs. The first game may have been the birth of a legend, but Mega Man 2 wrote that legend in stone and guaranteed that he wasn't going anywhere for a very, very long time. And I would be remiss to release this video without at least mentioning the hope for Mega Man's future. At the end of my first video, I stated that Mega Man is a dead franchise. Yeah, I was wrong. Hopefully. Within just a few months of that video's release, Capcom announced Mega Man 11. It's hardly a guarantee of the revival of the franchise, but it is the first ray of hope we Mega Man fans have had since the cancellation of Mega Man Legends 3, Rockman Online, and Mega Man Universe. Hopefully, Mega Man 11 will be every bit as good as the first trailer makes it look, and it will pave the way for Mega Man X9, Mega Man Legends 3, Mega Man ZX3, and more. But as it stands, I'm still not holding my breath. That said, I will absolutely be reviewing Mega Man 11 on launch, and may even make it a full episode of this retrospective when I get to that point. However, next time, I will be looking at the first game made after the series' viability had been established. See y'all then!